And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of Irreverent with me, Jamie Franklin. It's great to be with you today. Really excited to talk to you about all the big stories in church and state. Just me today. My other vicar friends are very busy, so you just got me. But I hope that will be interesting. I hope you'll enjoy listening to me talking for the next goodness knows how long, maybe an hour or so. Who knows? But essentially what I'm going to do today is I'll be talking about a few stories. I mean, it's been a funny week because, I'm recording on Wednesday, as we always do. People who support the podcast get this straight away. So it's more current. If you support the podcast on Patreon, patreon.com/irreverent, or in Substack, irreverentpod.substack.com, you'll get it early and it'll be more up to date. But as of Wednesday morning, when I'm recording this, I have to say it's one of those weeks where, there hasn't been sort of standout stories that are relevant and germane to the topic of this podcast, which is really about the intersection between faith and current affairs. We're just about hearing this news that's coming out at the moment about these Afghans that have been smuggled into Britain as a result, as I understand it, of the withdrawal from Afghanistan of Western troops. But to be honest, I don't know very much about that yet, or even whether it's newsworthy in that sense. And there's been economic stuff. Chelsea have won the Club World Cup, and Trump did this hilarious thing where he stood in there when they were raising the trophy. He just stood there and joined in with them doing the ultimate John Terry. I found that very amusing. I was upset that Chelsea beat PSG because obviously as a Spurs fan, I hate Chelsea, and I was actually loving seeing PSG do so well. They're a fantastic team, and the Club World Cup is a made-up competition anyway. That doesn't mean anything. But so there was all that stuff. There's, economic things going on. Labour are raising taxes again. That's hardly newsworthy because it just keeps happening. And what is there to say about it, apart from that it's a disastrous and counterproductive policy, but that they are ideologically committed to running this country into the ground economically. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about one story that caught my eye, which I think is germane to the content of this podcast, the topic of this podcast. Then I'm going to talk a bit about Church of England news. Now, as Church of England bods will know, the General Synod is happening at the moment, which it might not interest everyone, but it's sometimes a bit interesting to talk about sort of what people are debating in the Church of England's governing body. And then I'm going to go to our Telegram channel, and I'm going to do a kind of question the Rev/email section where I'm going to respond to some things that people have sent in, and we'll see how we go. So it's actually quite a lot of content this week. But as I say, those kind of, stories about big stories in the world, it's not loads that I can see. One thing I did want to say, though, is that it's really so sad to hear about the flooding in Texas. I heard a terrible story about a family that was swept away in the floods, and the 1-year-old son was killed. I mean, it's just awful. And this girls' camp as well, where these girls, some of them have been killed by the flooding, and it's just dreadful. And it does really once again raise that question of the problem of evil, of how a good God can allow these things to happen when it's the blind brute force of nature sweeping indiscriminately away those who are before it. It's a terrible and awful thing. And it puts the best book I've ever read on this is David Bentley Hart's book, The Doors of the Sea. And I have to say that kind of answer is the only sort of answer that I can make to this, which is that in brief, beyond this world is a world of redemption and a world of bliss and eternal life in union with God, and that it takes a kind of spiritual what's the right thing to say, a spiritual insight, let's say, to see that, and it's a lot of the time it's not always possible because of the nature of the suffering that we undergo in this world. But what I definitely don't believe is the notion that it is God's direct and heartfelt, if you like, will that we should suffer in this way. We, as Christians, and I know not all Christians, particularly those of a Calvinist bent, would agree with what I'm about to say, but we labor under the curse of a cosmic catastrophe, which is self-chosen. It's sin that has brought about this fallen world. And as a result of living in this fallen world, we suffer terribly because the world is in some tragic and catastrophic sense disconnected from God, who is the source of all life and joy and order and peace. And the other element to the Doors of the Sea, which David Bentley Hart brings forward, which I think is so right, is to talk about the spiritual component of all of this, the spiritual warfare that exists in the invisible realm, which is the warfare between God and his angels and Satan and the fallen angels. And of course, we have a problem talking about this kind of thing in modernity, but it is nevertheless the biblical reality. And therefore, the reality is that there is such a being as Satan. There are such beings as demons and fallen angels. Christ certainly believed in them, and I do as well. And they cause a lot of human misery and suffering. Who's to say, how that works particularly, but that is nevertheless a reality also. Which leads me to a quotation, which I'm doing from memory from that book. But David Bentley Hart says in that book, when I see the suffering of an innocent child, I do not see the face of God, but I see the face of his enemy. And I think that's absolutely right. When I see the suffering of an innocent child, I do not see the face of God, but I see the face of his enemy. That's kind of what I was thinking about when I was hearing about these dreadful stories about what had been going on in Texas and the suffering of children in particular. It's not to say that I think that therefore I've solved that problem of suffering and the existence of God, but nevertheless, I think that that's where I'd go with that. But really, what we need to do as Christians is not to solve a logical problem, but to pray and to beseech God for his mercy and deliverance for those who suffer terribly in this way, particularly those who grieve the loss of their children. So may God be with them, and may God grant them peace and mercy in their suffering and their sorrow and their loss. Which leads nicely to our scripture reading today, which is going to be from Luke chapter 10, verse 38 to 42. I don't mean nicely, I mean leads on to, it doesn't lead nicely in that sense. But first I'm going to say a prayer, and then I'm going to read this. I've chosen it because it's from the lectionary, and I'll be preaching on Sunday, so I've been thinking a bit about it, and I'm going to share some thoughts about it. So let's say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. So I just need to write stuff down while I'm going, because otherwise I forget what I've talked about, and then I can't write the show notes. So I'm just making a little note of what I started talking about. I've also got a little quotation that I want to bring up as a result of this. Yeah, I got it there. This reflection. So Luke 10, verses 38 to 42. You see, normally when I've got another person on, I can do this while the other person's talking. Not that I'm not always listening, of course. So this is the story of Martha and Mary. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. So it's a very famous story. It's a short story. It only occurs here in Luke, and it's been the subject of much writing and thought throughout Christian history, particularly in terms of the way that the figures of Mary and Martha symbolically represents contemplation and activity, respectively. And so there's a question here about the interplay in the spiritual life between the two, between contemplation, devotion to God, love for God, prayer and so on, and activity, which would be doing things in the service of God. Here, you've got Martha serving Christ. So you can see how that works. Christ says to Martha, who is anxious, distracted, and worried about things because she's serving, he says to her, Mary's chosen the better part. He won't rebuke Mary for engaging in devotion over service because she's chosen the better part. She's chosen the thing that is necessary. Now, I I think the way that this relates to the topic of this podcast is about the interplay between our engagement with culture and current affairs and the spiritual life. A lot of the time, I feel like I simply want to withdraw from these kind of conversations because it is so toxic sometimes to the soul to be preoccupied with what's going on in the world. Because a lot of the time, it's simply depressing. My new book, The Great Return, is about the way that Western civilization is inexorably declining because Christianity is receding and we're losing touch with our moral and spiritual vision that of the world that came to us through Christianity. And it's just basically documenting that in various ways. And then, I'm writing about this, I'm thinking about this, I'm podcasting about this, and I'm sure many of you are thinking about the same things as well and along the same sorts of lines. And it can be toxic to the soul. And I think in that sense, we could relate that to Martha and to that concept of activity, worry, being distracted, being scattered in our thoughts. And yet, when we come back to God in prayer and in silence and devotion, we find ourselves made whole, we find ourselves restored, we find ourselves strengthened. And really, when we have a profound experience of that, we want to stay in that place with God. We don't want to go back into this world of chaos and misery and anxiety. So what do we do with that? Do we just withdraw like a monastic type, or is there some way of engaging with the world as a result of being a spiritual person? Can we be a Martha in that sense after we've been a Mary? And that's really what I would say, I suppose. So I've asked the rhetorical question, but that's really what I want to say. What I want to say is that devotion to Christ has to come first. It has to be absolutely central. Otherwise, we will find ourselves like Martha. We will find ourselves anxious. We'll find ourselves distracted. We'll find ourselves scattered in our thoughts. And we won't be a harbinger of the presence of Christ in the world. We won't be a source of divine grace because we don't have that grace ourselves. We don't have that sense of Christ's presence. We don't carry it in ourselves to the world. And so we don't have that to give to the world. We might have a perspective which is truthful, but truth is about more than just believing what is correct. Truth is about conveying also the presence of Christ to those who are around us, showing the world that we actually have something different. It's not just that we've got good ideas about ethics or about economics or whatever it might be. It's actually about conveying something of God's life to the world around us, showing people the beauty of God, and that beauty being something that transforms human minds and hearts. And this is what actually changes people and changes things. I have a quotation here from Robert Cardinal Sarah from his book, The Power of Silence, which says a similar thing. I think he puts it very well. Jesus rebukes Mary not for being busy in the kitchen. After all, she did have to prepare the meal, but for her inattentive interior attitude, betrayed by her annoyance with her sister. Jesus seems to sketch out a spiritual pedagogy. We should always make sure to be Mary before becoming Martha. Otherwise, we run the risk of becoming literally bogged down in activism and agitation, the unpleasant consequences of which emerge in the gospel account. Panic, fear of working without help, an inattentive interior attitude, annoyance like Mary's towards her sister, the feeling that God is leaving us alone without intervening effectively. All activity must be preceded by an intense life of prayer, contemplation, seeking, and listening to God's will. Ours is a time of continual movement, which often leads to restlessness, with the risk of doing for the sake of doing. We must resist this temptation by trying to be before trying to do. We must resist this temptation by trying to be before trying to do. So, friends, that life of prayer, that life of being before God is absolutely central to everything. There are people who listen to this podcast I know who are sympathetic to the message in that sense, but then maybe don't go to church or not Christians. But this is why it's so essential to not just be a Christian, but to have a spiritual life, to engage in individual and corporate worship and devotion, because in that sense, in those moments or in those activities, we meet with Christ and we're transformed by him, and then we are enabled to take that message and that light out into an increasingly dark world. So not only is it necessary, but it's increasingly necessary as things get darker to be a Mary, to sit at the feet of Christ, to devote yourself to him, to know his love, to spend time in prayer and meditation and silence, which is not what I'm experiencing now because I can hear my kids shouting outside the door, in order that we might take the presence of Christ out into the world. So there we are. God bless you. Let's talk about a couple of things. So this is one of those, this is red meat. This is red meat for the Daily Mail readers, and probably for me, to be honest with you, and probably for you as well. But this is sort of a funny story, but in some ways it sort of tells you where we're at. From the Telegraph, number 10, backs girl punished by school for wearing Union flag dress. Now, what's going on here? Downing Street has backed a 12-year-old girl after she was put into isolation, goodness gracious me, for wearing a Union flag dress on a culture day. Straight A student Courtney Wright wore the Spice Girls-esque dress and wrote a piece about British history and traditions as part of the celebrations on Friday. She was told later the dress was unacceptable and was hauled out of lessons and made to sit in reception until her father collected her. Now, just to say, the dress is very evocative of Jerry Halliwell's dress from the Spice Girls. You famously see her knickers through it. Let's read a bit further on. Speaking on Tuesday, Keir Starmer's spokesman said that being British is something to be celebrated and welcomed the school's apology. Why didn't Keir Starmer just say that himself? Why does he have a spokesman for saying things? It really annoys me. The Church of England does that as well. I think it's quite pathetic when people can't speak for themselves. Imagine if I had a spokesman and I sent him out and said, Jamie Franklin's spokesman says this. Why wouldn't I just say it myself? Anyway, they added, we're a tolerant, diverse, open country. We're proud of being British. I think the school has put out a statement apologising for this specific incident. So I'm not going to comment any further on that, but the PM has always been clear that being British is something to be celebrated. Has he indeed? Labour MP Mike Tapp said to apologise, they should fly the British flag loud and proud. Bilton School in Rugby, Warwickshire, said it deeply regretted the distress caused by the incident and was committed to, quote, learning from this experience and ensuring that every student feels recognised and supported when expressing pride in their heritage. Stuart Field, who's 47, said his daughter was removed from the culture celebration day last week without saying a single word and without being allowed to make an inclusive speech about the importance to her of being British, which referenced drinking tea, fish and chips, and values of fairness and politeness. What else would you put in there? I'm not sure. I talk about the Premier League probably, but then I don't know if everyone would agree that that's something sort of quintessentially British. Certainly not these days with so much foreign influence anyway. Drinking tea, fish and chips, and values of fairness and politeness. Might even talk about the Church of England. In a post on Facebook, Mr. Field wrote, on the way to collect my daughter from school, she's currently being made to sit at reception waiting for me. The reason? It's Cultural Diversity Day at school where children can wear clothing representing their culture and write a speech about their heritage. She's been told it's not for her as she gets to celebrate being British every day. That's the key, isn't it? That's what they said. It's not something she was supposed to be doing. She wasn't supposed to be celebrating being British because she can do that every day. Whereas today's not the day to celebrate being British. The day is the day to celebrate being everything else except for British. Isn't this something we see quite a lot? This sort of passive aggressive attitude where every single other culture, every single other ethnicity is allowed to be celebrated in our society except being a white British person. And of course, if you were to turn that round, if you were to apply it to literally any other ethnicity, any other culture, and said that's not allowed to be celebrated, it would be considered racist. But it's not considered racist when it's applied towards and directed towards white people, because white people are privileged and white people should not be celebrated because of their colonial past, because they are deviants, because they are overlords, because they oppress people from other ethnicities and so on and so forth. That's what's behind all of this. I see it all the time. Unfortunately, I see it in the Church of England as well, buying into um, this racist and racially antagonistic attitude, which is unfortunately so prevalent in all of our institutions now, including the educational establishment. Courtney said teachers told her only other cultures were allowed to celebrate. She said she felt really embarrassed, and that some teachers even said they liked the dress as it was really sparkly and looked like ginger spice. I mean, can you imagine how embarrassed she would have felt? However, she said teachers point blank refused to let her read her speech about British culture, and they didn't want to hear it at all. You know what she should have done is she should have added a celebration of the British Empire and of all the things that it bequeathed to the world. That would have been fantastic. My speech was about diversity and all the traditions we have in Britain, our politeness, humour, drinking tea. We talk about the weather and we like rugby and football. The school have since apologised. Even though the school has suggested reading my speech, I don't think I want to after how they embarrassed and upset me. A spokesman for the Stowe Valley Trust said, at Bilton School, we are proud of the diversity of our students and the rich heritage they bring to our community. We are committed to fostering an environment where every pupil feels respected, valued, and included. Yeah, not her, though. She didn't feel respected, valued, and included, being made to sit in reception and then literally taken home, kicked out of school for doing that. On Friday, the 11th of July, an incident occurred. It occurred. It just occurred. Nobody caused it. Nobody was responsible. During our culture celebration day that caused considerable upset to one of our pupils, her family, and members of the wider community. You mean all the British people, all the English people? We deeply regret the distress this has caused and offer our sincere and unreserved apologies. Is that a real apology? Regretting distress is not the same thing as saying it was wrong to do what you did. We have since spoken directly with the pupil and her family to listen to their concerns and reflect on this, how this could have been handled better. Well, presumably the answer to that is that she simply shouldn't have been chastised for doing what she did and should have been allowed to read her speech like everyone else. Just a thought might save you a lot of time and spent reflecting and going through alternatives. We're committed to learning from this experience and ensuring that every student feels recognized and supported when expressing pride in their heritage. Again, it's not really very hard to work out how to do that. As a school, we are reviewing our policies and strengthening staff training to ensure our practices reflect our values of inclusion, respect, and understanding for all. Do you really need a policy change in order to understand how to address this? I would suggest that just some common sense might be adequate. Just thinking to yourself, well, maybe it's not really right to stop someone from celebrating British culture on a culture celebration day. Might cause some problems. Maybe you should have just gone with it rather than making a big deal out of it. Now it's in the Telegraph and across all the broadsheet newspapers. Sir Keir Starmer's spokesman said on Tuesday afternoon that being British is something to be celebrated and welcome the school's apology. I think this article has already said that. This is literally the Telegraph article ends with a repeat of what was written earlier. It's not amazing journalism, I have to say. I'm not a journalist myself, but yeah, you probably should have edited that out. Most liked article, liked 4,346 times on the Telegraph website. The school has lost the plot thinking that culture is any but British, and it shows how far Britain has been submerged and is disparaged. Now, that's a good point, actually, because that's referring to this idea that all British culture is about welcoming other cultures and not having a culture of its own. So having, values like, say, inclusion and tolerance and diversity and respect, but not actually having a cultural identity. Now, what would a cultural identity be? It would ironically actually involve some of the things that girl was talking about: customs, language, religion, food, sport, what else? Pastimes, um, political what would you call it? Political constitutions and infrastructure, and various things of the sort, intellectual traditions, all kinds of things. That's what would be constitutive of a culture. But we're not allowed to have a culture in Britain. We're not allowed to be a culture. We're not actually allowed to celebrate everything that Britain is and everything that Britain has given the world, because of this post-colonial guilt that we're supposed to be, because we have imbibed this horrible uh, critical race theory coming over from America with its toxic poison, its attempt to stir up racial antagonism and reinscribe racial antagonism into our society, which was very much free of it when I was growing up as a child. In the 90s, we didn't have any of this nonsense. We probably had a bit of the post-colonial guilt stuff, but it was really not making itself felt like it is now. It's obviously an air of postmodern deconstructionists like Jean-Paul Sartre. Well, not Sartre was an existentialist, but Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida, and all of these people coming out of the Frankfurt School who hated the West and wanted to undermine our traditions, which are ultimately rooted in Christianity. So really, all of this stuff is ultimately an attack on Christianity itself. So that's where it's all coming from. It might seem like, oh, what is this madness? But it's stemming from a post-Christian ideology, a post-Christian philosophy, which is really rooted in hatred of the West and all of its customs. So that's why it's so completely unfair to English culture, British culture, white people, and so on and so forth, because it's not actually based in any kind of fair empirical analysis of the situation. We see that with slavery. White people are said to be sort of uniquely guilty of the sin of slavery, whereas every other culture in the world has also practiced it, and it's only in white Western Christian cultures that slavery was actually abolished to begin with. Actually, probably that's not right to say. In the first millennium, there were many non-white cultures that in which slavery died out. But the thing that they had in common was that they were Christian cultures in that sense. But certainly in early modernity, when it was banned, when it was abolished, it was in Britain as a result of white Christian people, William Wilberforce and the Clapham sect. So that would just be one example, but there are many others as well. The Industrial Revolution started in Northern England. In some ways, it makes England one of the most influential societies or civilizations, if you want to put it that way, let's say countries or nations, that has ever existed. But we're not allowed to celebrate that because we're white, because we're British, because we're English. We can't celebrate that. We can't celebrate the civilizing effects of the British Empire, because the empire is held to be a uniquely bad thing. It's not to say that everything the empire did was good, but it is to say that it's had a hugely beneficial effect on many of the countries that we colonized, and also that many of the countries have done a lot worse since they gained their independence, which was meant to be a sort of sunlit upland. So anyway, the point is that all of this stuff feeds into this. All of this stuff brings about a sort of cultural feeling where this sort of thing is deemed to be appropriate. And what it will lead to eventually is, let's put it like this, if we continually disdain our culture, if we continually persecute anyone who says anything positive about it or wants to celebrate it in any way, if we continually pour invective upon our own customs, tradition, history, and heritage, what will eventually happen is that culture will be subsumed by something else. Probably Islam if the demographic change continues in this way. But certainly in the meantime, a kind of horrendous post-Christian secular ideology, which is essentially a kind of celebration of nihilism and death, which is what we're seeing at the moment. So it might seem like a sort of, in some ways, a trivial, funny story. And in some ways it is funny. Not for this girl, of course, who I have a lot of sympathy for. Must have been very embarrassing. But in another way, it is a sign of the decline of Western civilization and of the death-like state we are entering into unless things turn around. So that's my analysis of that. So let's move on. Just make a note of that. 12-year-old schoolgirl, what would you say? I don't know. Persecuted by school for celebrating being British, something like that. Anyway, that's that story. Now let's move on to some Church of England move news before we move on from there to some to some other things to do with emails and so on and so forth. So it's General Synod at the moment. So for people who don't know, and to be honest, I don't take a great interest in this either. But General Synod is the governing body of the Church of England. It was instituted, I think, in 1969, um, and uh, and basically it's a kind of you can get a sort of sense of the vibe in the church by looking at what's going on there. Three houses: clergy, bishop, and laity, and they determine the church's doctrine and they talk about various things and blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. Has anything interesting happened this week? A couple of things. So one of the things is that the so-called LLF stuff, which is the living in love and faith stuff, which is basically this ongoing conversation about human sexuality, that has essentially foundered, and I think it's founded because there was no way of really achieving, for the liberals, there was no way of achieving what they wanted to achieve, which is essentially, to have full gay marriage and so on and so forth. Justin Welby tried his best, but it didn't work. And since he's gone, I don't really think there's anyone pushing this, and I don't think anyone really knows what to do. It's interesting, Bishop of Winchester, who's my bishop, sent I think it was an ad clarem to the clergy saying that he thought that the process had stalled. In fact, he said something even more minor than that, which is that some people feel like it's stalled. And then he was asked about this in public in Synod, and he had to admit that he'd written it. Um, as though that's some kind of outrageous thing to have said. But I think that that's correct. I think that's what's happened. So that's a good thing in my opinion, because I don't think the church should be changing its doctrine. I don't think the church should have been engaged in the living in love and faith process in the beginning, because I do accept that we should show love and compassion to those who have different opinions or those who choose to live differently. But I don't think the church should be having an ongoing discussion about changing its doctrine around marriage and sexuality. Last week, we spoke about Justin Welby, who basically said at the Cambridge Union that although Jesus says what marriage is, we actually know better now about human relationships and sexuality. And that's really the kind of attitude that's, because we've done all this study, and that's the kind of attitude that's really driving this whole thing. It's an attempt to liberalize and revolutionize the doctrine of sexuality and marriage within the Church of England. So that's not happening. That's good. Clergy pension poverty to be prevented after synod address. So this is basically an update to clergy pensions. It is quite hard. I know, people think that, priests have it really good because we live in nice houses and things like that. But for some of the time anyway. But there are definite downsides with that, which is that basically that comes out of what we would be paid otherwise, and you have no choice in what house you live in. So you have to sort of put up with it. It's what comes with the job. So if you want the job, you either like it or lump it. And it also means for many, many people that they've got no equity when they retire, and they're forced to rely on this clergy housing scheme called the Charm Scheme, which is for many people, it's very, very inadequate, or they're just thrust into a sort of quasi poverty situation. Um, so following the spring campaign by a particular body, the Church of England Pensions Board and Archbishops' Council brought proposals to the General Synod to correct many of the historic clergy pension injustices, in particular the restoration of the accrual rate from half of the stipend to two-thirds, as well as a significant increase in the stipend itself, and thus a corresponding increase in the pension. I think that's a good thing, particularly when you consider that the church commissioners have an investment fund of 11 billion pounds, and yet they allow this to continue. They allow this significant financial problem that they cause for clergy by not paying them properly and trying to scrimp on their pensions. It's just absolutely outrageous. I've said before that I think clergy should be paid much better than they are, because I think it would be more attractive to better and higher quality candidates if we did. And I think it would also be fair and reflect the level of skill and education it takes to do this job well. I'm not saying that everyone who does the job does it well, but I'm saying that we should be paid as though we are people who are skilled and are people who have knowledge and ability and work very hard. So anyway, so I think that that's good, and agree with that, what's happened. I suppose you would say I would do, but I would remind you that I'm actually not paid by the church. I make my own money podcasting and writing. So it doesn't actually benefit me in any way. Maybe one day, I mean, I suppose I do have some pension in the Church of England, but not very much. I can't pay into it at the moment, so I'm not directly benefiting from it very much at all. But I think that's a good thing. Maybe I will one day. Who knows? Not at the moment. Anyway, Synod silence on Gaza amounts to complicity, says priest. This is from the Church of England, sorry, the Church Times. Palestinian Christians are grieved and disappointed by the decision not to schedule a debate during the General Synod session in York, which begins on Friday. A letter to Synod's Secretary General William Nye from the Christian Palestinian organization Kairos Palestine, sent late last month, says neither history nor future generations will forgive the silence of the church. The letter refers to a Carlisle Diocesan Synod motion that has not been chosen as an item of business. The motion, carried in 2021 and endorsed by the Diocese of Sheffield in 2024, calls on the church's investment bodies to review their policies and to ensure that there's no investment in any entity or corporation with persistent, ongoing, and direct business involvement in severe human rights violations or violations of international law as part of Israel's military occupation. In an interview after her return from a visit to Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank, the Bishop of Gloucester, the Right Reverend Rachel Treweek, called the decision not to timetable the debate quite shocking. I suppose what I think about this is that I'm glad that this debate wasn't timetabled in General Synod. I think that the church has got a lot more significant and pressing concerns than debating whether to stop investing in Jewish companies, which is essentially what this is talking about. I personally don't think that's a very good look. As we've shown on this podcast before, the church commissioners invest in all sorts of things which are ethically questionable. And I think that that sort of thing is not a great look. And I also don't agree with the ideology that's behind it. You can see what's behind it in the language of Israel's military occupation, which is basically referring to their presence in, I would say, not only Gaza but also in the Middle East in general. It's clearly coming from an anti-Israeli point of view, a pro-Palestinian point of view, which is of course the bien-pensant leftist default position in our culture today. And I think that would just have been more of an opportunity for virtue signaling personally. Since say that I don't think the situation in Israel and Gaza is complicated, it obviously is complicated, and we should have lots and lots of compassion for people who are whose lives are destroyed, whose homes are destroyed, whose children are killed as a result of war. War is a terrible thing. But what's not mentioned in these debates or these articles is the murder of Jews, the destruction of Jewish families, the killing of Jewish children, the kidnap and torture and murder of Jewish hostages, and so on and so forth, that has provoked this latest war, which was an event of such nightmarish violence and evil and wickedness that it's hard to believe that it actually happened. That's what's not mentioned. That's what's not spoken about, and that's the moral blindness that I think is significant here. I know people will disagree with me, but that's what I think about it. I do care about the suffering of Palestinian Christians. I think that's an important issue, but I don't think that would have been the right thing for General Synod to have done. Final thing about this is we can see on the Church Times website actually today that the Synod has urged the government to scrap the assisted dying bill and to fund desperately needed palliative care. Sorry, I just have to sign in to actually look at this. So I'll just do a quick sign in. Sorry, it's all live and there's only me. So I just have to do everything myself, which is fine. I'm not complaining. Here it goes. This is a line. I can't read it. Oh, that's a shame. This is a line our nation must not cross, was the message from the General Synod after it voted by a significant majority to condemn a bill to legalise assisted dying, currently working its way through Parliament. The motion, introduced by the Bishop of London, the Right Reverend Sarah Mullally, called on the government to boost funding for palliative care instead of enacting the terminally ill adults bill. So that's the right thing for General Synod to be doing. Whether they will continue to oppose this, even when it comes into law and when it starts to be implemented, will be the real test. They're saying the right things at the moment. These things should be condemned. The government should scrap this bill, and we should not cross this line as a culture. The consequences will be absolutely hellish if we do. And of course, as I always say, this is indicative of a further move away from our Christian identity as a civilization. So there we go. Now I'm going to move on to emails and to questions in a moment. I just want to say a couple of things. The first thing is that if you enjoy this podcast, I really, really need your support. Now, as I said earlier, I'm not paid by the church. I do live in a church house because I'm a parish priest. I have a church which I'm in charge of. So I have all of that to do as a parish priest. But I'm also a podcaster and I'm a writer. I'm an author, as many of you will know. My book, The Great Return, Why Only a Return, A Restoration of Christianity Will Save Western Civilization, is out now to buy everywhere. Please buy my book. But more importantly, for the purposes of this show, please support the podcast. Okay, the podcast costs hundreds of pounds a month to run, and I need the money to support myself and to live. I also have another couple of things that I'm going to plug as well in a minute, which help. But do it for that reason, to support me, but also do it because you love the podcast and you want more of what we do. I release the episodes early, so they're more current if for subscribers. And also you get a bonus podcast, which is called Uncollared, where we chew the fat about various things. So I often do sort of Ask Me Anything and things like that, or have a chat with Tom and Daniel about various things that are going on in our lives or behind the scenes type stuff. And they're often very good. They're often half an hour or more, so you get lots of really good content there. And we do that almost every week for people who subscribe. So if you subscribe, you're really, really helping us. Okay, so please do bear that in mind. If you're listening to this podcast and you like it, I'm not just saying this like, oh, if you get the time, or if you happen to think about it, we'd like some help. What I'm saying is, if you listen to this podcast, I'd like you to really consider supporting the podcast. Say you listen to it every week and you never have supported us. Please make this the week where you decide to support us, because if you do that, you'll be securing the long-term future of this podcast and you will be directly involved in that. You'll be helping us, you'll be helping me, and you'll get free stuff as well, which, is a win-win for everyone. Now, the good news is you can do this for as little as £2.50 plus VAT in the UK per month on Patreon. That's right, £2.50. I have put it up £1 a month, from £1.50 to £2.50 plus VAT in the UK. It's not very much. I've never put the prices up before, but I have done this recently because we need to increase our income a little bit. But I hope that won't stop anyone from subscribing. £2.50 plus VAT, which is 50p, I think 20% in the UK. So it's £3 in total a month. Okay. Just to put that in context, sometimes, not always, but sometimes I like to get out of the house and have a coffee in the morning, and I go to a bakery down the road. I pay £3.25 for a coffee in that bakery. Maybe I do that 2 or 3 times a month. But, basically subscribing to this podcast and supporting us costs less than that coffee that I buy. So I think that everyone can afford £2.50 plus another 50p if you live in the UK per month, if you like this podcast, and you get all that free stuff. So I don't think I'm being unreasonable in asking for your support. Please do support the show. Go to our website, irreverendpod.com. Click on the red button, which is the Patreon button, and support us on Patreon today. If you would like to, you can also support us on Substack as an alternative, where you get exactly the same stuff. It's a £5 pricing point there, because that's just the way Substack works. And you can find that at irreverendpod.substack.com. You can buy us a coffee as well, which is basically a direct donation. There's a yellow button on our website, irreverendpod.com. What's even better than doing that, though, if you do have a donation that you'd like to give is to do it directly because it cuts out the middleman. So if you'd like to do that, please email irreverendpod@gmail.com and ask me for details of how you can do that. And that's a wonderful way of helping us. And then I can give you complimentary access to all the stuff anyway. Another couple of things. I have my own personal blog where I write about spiritual, devotional, and intellectual matters called Good Things. That's available at jamiefranklin.substack.com. Many people like that blog and I get good support there. That's a kind of weekly digest type thing, and I release that on Saturdays. It's meant to be uplifting and interesting rather than sort of negative and toxic and political. However, if you're into negative and toxic and political, hopefully not too much, you can read my new blog, which is coming out this week. I'm hoping to release the first one actually on Friday when this podcast is going to come out. It's called Signs of the Times, and you can find it at signsofthetimesblog.substack.com. There I am going to take off the safety catch and I'm going to give you both barrels of what I think about things. So it's going to be my writing about current events, about current issues, things that are going on in the political and secular world, and the interplay between the secular world and Christianity, very much coming out of the themes to do with my book, The Great Return, where I'm cataloguing essentially the decline of the West as we move away from Christianity, whilst hoping and praying, of course, for a revival of the faith, which is the only thing that can save us. Ultimately, Christ is the only thing that can save us. But if you'd like to join me on that blog, go to signsofthetimesblog.substack.com and sign up today. Again, as with Good Things, my other blog, there's a £5 pricing point or £50 per year if you'd like to support in that way. Helps me massively to have that income. That income is also absolutely essential to me. So I started another blog, and that's another way you can support, another way you can engage with some of the things I'm doing. So there we go. So those are my plugs. Another plug, which I'm doing for free because I want to help. Two listeners in Worcestershire emailed to say that with the Church of England hierarchy so frequently disheartening, we find the podcast a huge source of sanity, reassurance, and light. We've got a full-time stipendiary vacancy in our benefice of Barrow and Longden at the foot of the beautiful Malvern Hills. The Liberal diocese watered down our advert in the Church Times, but the determination of our great group of energetic and orthodox lay volunteers to be part of the quiet revival of the Church is stronger than ever, and we're desperate for a sound applicant, orthodox clergy who might be interested. Please take a look. Now, I'm reading that again, partly because I want to help, but partly because I think I forgot to put the link on the show notes last time. So I'm going to write down in my notes, don't forget, link for adverts for show notes. Okay, so there we go. Hopefully that benefice will get a really sound and super vicar. And that will be a great blessing. And it would be amazing if that happened through this podcast. So what I'm going to do now is I've got about 25 minutes or so before I feel like I should finish because I don't want to bore you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an email. Then I'm going to go to Telegram and see one of the question, the revs, or a comment that's been written on there. Then I'll come back and do another email. Then I'll go to Telegram and I'll just do it like that. I'm going to go backwards and forwards in this amazingly dynamic way. And sort of see how that goes. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back after a long time something that we've all enjoyed, but perhaps we haven't had recently, which is the Question the Rev theme tune. So here we go. And thank you for Vaughan once again for putting this together. That was wonderful. It gave me an opportunity to have a quick swig of water, which has really refreshed me after talking now for about an hour and a half, having recorded Uncollared and now doing this. My throat is getting a little bit sore and I'm feeling a little bit parched, but actually I'm full of energy and ready to answer your questions on Question the Rev. Let's begin. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for both the shows. They continue to be insightful, faithful, and humorous. I don't want to create wild conspiracy theories, but do you gentlemen think there is any coincidence that allegations have appeared about Bishop Martin of Leicester as he emerges as a strong orthodox candidate to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury? And then Matt links to Bishop of Leicester accusing stalking victim of witchcraft. I know you talked recently about him no longer leading the LLF process, that's the gay marriage stuff, and that as a conservative that he may have tired of the process. to me, it just seems convenient timing that this is in the press now, giving ammunition for to some to say he's just like Welby and open the door for a more progressive candidate. Am I way off? Do you guys have any thoughts or insight? Well, I suppose this story is about it's quite a complicated and weird story about this lay preacher woman who I think was harassing this bloke, and then this bloke went to the Bishop of Leicester, if I'm remembering this rightly, which I think I am, and the Bishop of Leicester basically, didn't take him seriously. Yeah, I just clicked on the link. That is what it's about. But regardless of the story, I suppose it relates this, is there a conspiracy to get Bishop of Leicester out? Yeah, maybe. I mean, why not? He is the most orthodox candidate that's a sort of front runner. I'm not really sure how orthodox he is. I wouldn't be somebody who's heading up a process that I think is sort of fundamentally unorthodox in its nature and has unorthodox aims. I would have questions about, but of course, he could have been taken out by anyone. I mean, the Church of England has a deep state as much as the government does. It's called the Archbishop's Council, and there are probably other bodies within the Church of England that are maneuvering behind the scenes as well. So maybe he didn't do the right thing here as well. That's also possible. That he probably should have taken this guy seriously when he came to him and said, I'm being harassed by this lunatic woman. Maybe that's also true. Those two things could be true at the same time. So yeah, maybe. I suppose the other thing that this shows is that this safeguarding thing, it can be weaponized against anyone at any time and for almost any reason. People were obviously sick of Welby and they wanted to get rid of him. And so the John Smythe thing was a very convenient way of doing that. Um, I think he probably was, um, I think he probably was negligent over Smythe, but there are all sorts of things that he could have legitimately resigned for, not least his leadership during COVID. But he didn't. He resigned because of this. So safeguarding, it's really a Trojan horse. It can be weaponized at any time and for any reason. It's something that I think is out of control in the church in terms of the bureaucracy, the time and expense that's wasted on it. I obviously believe in safeguarding the children and the vulnerable in churches, and I think that should be a very, very high priority of every church. It's something I place a hugely high priority on here. Um, but I don't think that the sort of endless proliferation of the bureaucratic machine of the Church of England is the way to protect people. The way to protect people is ultimately to have good structures of accountability within the local church, and it is to have hearts which are transformed by the gospel and people with common sense so that we can root out wolves in sheepskin clothing and predators within our midst. I don't think it's, through vetting, the dear old lady who wants to serve the tea and making her, gather references and do, a DBS check and all this kind of nonsense. So that's what I think about that. It is something which is concerning. So that's the first one. So I can't bother to write all this down. Let's go on to Telegram. Somebody's asked a question about the Archbishop of Wales, but it's a similar kind of thing, and it's a couple of months old, so I'm not going to read that. Fiona, sorry, it's a grim one, but there is a story in the news today that in Ireland there is the start of a 2-year dig about after a mass grave was discovered where Catholic nuns had buried the babies of single mothers, an absolutely terrible thing. But where is the fury and care for babies being killed now? I seem to remember Irish women out celebrating in the streets after a change of law quite recently gave them the right to legally kill their own babies. How can one cause outrage and not the other? So the one causing outrage, there's not a link for that, but presumably it caused outrage because what? The single mothers killed their babies, maybe that. So there's an inconsistency there. There are all kinds of inconsistencies in this thing. We spoke about last week about how um, mothers are going to be entitled to compassionate leave if they have a miscarriage before 24 weeks now in Labour's new employment bill. Um, but presumably they kill their babies before that point through so-called abortion, or afterwards they won't get compassionate leave because ultimately it's up to them whether it actually counts as a bereavement or not. So, anyways, that yeah, yeah, of course, there's an inconsistency there. Same person, I'll just read this as well. Is banning Palestine action a concern for those of us who hold countercultural views like being pro-life, pro-marriage, pro-Christ? Is it making it too easy for things to be classed as terrorism, using a group that many of us may disagree with that in the future can easily be turned and used against us? And then there was a bit of a discussion on Telegram. By the way, if you want to join our Telegram group, t.me/Reverend Pod, it's a really good group. But yeah, I think actually Fiona, we're quite perspicacious there because yeah, of course, I think that this group is a mad bunch of overprivileged lefties probably, but yeah, prescribing it as a terrorist organization for whatever they did. Was it like spray painting some planes at RAF Bryce Norton? Also, the security there must be absolutely horrendous. I saw these pictures of this chain link fence that these people scaled. Is it possible that it was allowed for that to happen, so that then this group could be prescribed, and then other groups could be prescribed as terrorist? I think that's probably true. I think what terrorism is, vandalizing a plane is not terrorism. Terrorism is killing people and blowing people up and things like that. That's terrorism, suicide bombing. So yeah, I do agree with that. I think there's something to that, what you're saying there. Um, Okay, what's this here? All right, I'm gonna park that one for next week. Um, hmm, maybe I'll do this one. Now, this might sound slightly self-congratulatory, but I'm going to read this anyway. Hi, Jamie. I hope this finds you well. Just wanted to reach out and say thank you for writing such an impressive book. My friend Helen gave me a signed copy recently, and I can honestly say it's the best book I've read in a very long time. Well, thank you, Marcus. It's really kind of you. I actually wonder if this might become something of a reference point for an emerging movement within the Church of England and beyond. I'm interested to know where you stand on the vision and strategy of the Alliance, particularly as it relates to the Reconquista concept being promoted by Redeemed Zuma, which encourages conservatives not to abandon their spiritual inheritance because of the serial heresy of the liberals. In case you're not familiar, more info is here. And then there's a link to a page, redeemzuma.com, which I have to admit I've not looked at. I'll see if I can load it up quickly now. It's not actually loading though, so I might not be able to. Um, so anyway, sorry, I'm just gonna have a bit of water because my throat is hurting. I don't see like my book being much of a reference point for a movement within the Church of England, if I'm perfectly honest with you. Not least because I think it lacks the influence and the reach for that, but because I think that it's about a revival of Christianity in the abstract. There's no real ecclesiology that's implied by it, I don't think. Um, Apart from the occasional positive comment about the Book of Common Prayer. And actually, that leads to what I think is the only real potential point of union for the Church of England, which is the Book of Common Prayer. Um, it's actually something Tom said to me recently, which I sort of thought anyway, but it's concretized. It's concretized it for me. The Book of Common Prayer has a kind of generous orthodoxy implied within it that can hold together evangelicals and Anglo-Catholics, who are, after all, the two wings of the church that are least potentially orthodox. It can't hold together liberals because they repudiate what it is and what it stands for, regardless of how you interpret it. So the Book of Common Prayer, sorry, could bring together Orthodox people within the Church of England, if we return to it. Um, it was a terrible mistake to get rid of it and to replace it with, what was first called Order 1, 2, and 3, and then the Alternative Service Book, and which is now Common Worship. We no longer have a common liturgy in the Church of England, which, as the Church of England, means that we no longer have a common belief system, really. I mean, for all intents and purposes. So we need to get it back. We need to get the Book of Common Prayer back. And it just needs to be unilaterally enforced. And of course, that seems crazy at the moment, but that is the only answer, as far as I can tell. In lieu of that, there will be no unity in the Church of England. Um, Marcus says that he's a recently relocated missionary He says, I believe it's an exciting time to be a Christian and especially an Anglican because I do believe there is something significant and redemptive in Anglicans' historic commitment to being both Reformed and Catholic. So do I. And most specifically in our simultaneous commitment to both the authority of Scripture and an unusual openness to agility in church tradition as articulated by Article 34 of the 39 Articles. Those are a sort of doctrinal statement of faith, for want of a better way of putting it, at the end of the Book of Common Prayer. I think that's very well put, Marcus. Anyway, thanks for the great return again, and of course the mighty Irreverend Pod. I've been a weekly listener since the COVID days and hugely appreciate your consistently based perspective on things, Marcus. Thanks, Marcus. That's really, really kind of you. I really appreciate you reading the book and saying nice things about it. By the way, speaking of based, I actually did a shout out to folks who might have listened to me on the James Delingpole podcast, which came out for subscribers, his subscribers last week. I don't think it's come out on the regular pod yet, but just to say, if you found your way over from Delingpole, you're really welcome, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast. It's great to be with you. Really enjoyed being with James. So let's move over to Telegram now and continue. Kevin, constant voter intention polling by YouGov suggests that the UK is still predominantly conservatively inclined, and that when you take into account Brexit results and Boris Johnson's majority combined with the rise of reform, it's clear there's a silent majority that keeps expressing its opinion, even though it's ignored and vilified. The question is, how much more betrayal can the UK tolerate before there's a serious backlash, other than Conservatives being voted out? What should a reformation look like? What are the options? Keep calm and keep voting, or keep calm and trust God, or both? Yeah, so I think Kevin's right there. I think there is a silent majority, definitely, and I think you can see that in, like he said here, these opinion polls. Let's just get this one up, but we know what it will say. So we have Reform on 26% of the vote in voter intention, and Labour on 24. Conservative on 16, and Lib Dem on 15, Green on 11, SNP on 3. So it wouldn't get Reform an overall majority, but it would. It is quite amazing. 6th to 7th of July 2025. There's 4 years till the general election. What's it going to be like in 4 years' time? Particularly if Labour keeps running the country into the ground, as it clearly is, and they can't see that changing at any time soon. So what does that mean? It means that people are sick of the Uniparty. People want to see change. And in that sense, there is hope. Like in 1984, Winston Smith writes, if there is hope, it lies with the proles. If we can vote out the Uniparty, we can vote out Labour, and if Reform can do some of the things that we need to do, which is number one, stop mass immigration, just stop it dead, stop all illegal immigration, massively scale down legal migration or immigration. Number one, if they can do that, whether they will or not, I don't know. But that would be one thing. And then they've got to reform the constitutional system. They've got to leave the European Court of Human Rights. We have to reform the Human Rights Act. We have to scale back the power of the civil service. We have to depoliticize the judiciary and all sorts of other things. Can they do all this? Many people know that these things need to be done, and many people within Reform know that it need to be done. Is there the political will to do it, though? Is a different question. I'm still skeptical because I do think you need a Christian framework for this to work. I don't think it can just be done through sheer force of will. I mean, I suppose it could be to a certain extent done out of the necessity to protect our country from the infiltration of and takeover of Islam. Maybe that might be a motivating factor, but I don't think that will arrest the decline, the societal decline of British culture. Because I think that's fundamentally based upon Christianity. It won't change people's hearts. It won't bring down basic levels of bad behavior and criminality and the loss of cohesion in community and all these sorts of things. So I do think there is hope politically for 4 years' time that at least things could get better in certain things, which is, maybe the situation with immigration might get slightly better, but you've got to understand the catastrophe we're living under, we're living with in terms of this demographic change that we're undergoing at the moment. I can't remember whether I said it here or on Uncollared. I think it was on Uncollared, so I'll repeat it here. But, Professor Matt Goodwin, estimates that by the end of this century, 1 in 4 people in Britain will be following the religion of Islam, and it will actually be 1 in 3 for people who are under 30. White Britons will cease to be a majority in their own country by 2060. Um, this is demographic change on a scale that we have never even conceived before. It's happening despite the fact that voters in Britain have consistently voted against mass immigration. They clearly don't want it, but our elite class, as Kevin is saying, is betraying the UK time and time again by allowing this kind of thing to proliferate and continue. And unless it's halted, that will everything else will become an irrelevance because we'll become a caliphate like has happened in Iran. It can happen here. It's what will happen here unless things change. So that would be number one. As I say, there might be hope for small, nevertheless significant changes, reversals of some of the horrendous things that Labour is doing now. It doesn't take a genius to work out that what we need is an economic policy which is completely different to the tax and spend, high tax threshold, just increase taxes all the time and keep spending view of sophomoric view of Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer clearly doesn't work. It's clearly catastrophic. It's clearly debilitating for people and is impoverishing people in our nation. So if we saw, look, it's just obvious. You just need Afweda. You just need to get rid of many government departments. You need to scale them back. You need to stop spending so much money, scale it back massively, start paying off debt, reduce rather than increase taxes in order to promote investment in British business and British industry, scrap the green levies, which are causing energy prices to be the highest. I think we have the highest energy prices in Europe. So why would anyone want to start a business here because we have these ridiculous tariffs for this made up climate change nonsense, this scam, which is impoverishing our country and driving it into the ground. I'm not an economist, right? I'm just a vicar. Some people might say I'm a sort of public intellectual in that sense, not to be too grandiose about myself, but I try and, inform myself about these things. If I know this, then there are people in reform who know it as well. And they will know it much better, they will understand it much better than I do. And they hopefully will be able to implement it. But all those other things need to happen as well, the constitutional reforms, because the blob, the civil service and the politicized judiciary and everyone else, they won't want this to happen. So there has to be a lot of political will, there has to be a lot of canniness in that sense for it to happen. I don't know about the ins and outs of that. All I'm doing is looking in on it. Look what happened to Liz Truss, who tried to return to something more like a kind of Thatcherite economic vision. Look what happened to her. She was taken down by the deep state, and the same thing will happen with reform if they're not canny about it. They need to be more like Trump the second time rather than the first time. I heard Matt Goodwin saying that, and I think he's right about that. They need to be canny. They can't be naive when they're going in. As I say, they know this stuff much better than I do. So let's hope they can do it. Let's hope that something good can come out of it. There's a lot of talk on the Telegram group about an episode of Rev. Somebody thought that they were showing Rev, the sitcom, currently, and said, did anyone see the latest episode of Rev on Channel 4 Friday night? No, but I've watched the show several times and it's about 15, 20 years old. I love Rev, although I have to say I don't watch it anymore because I think it's a little bit too close to home as a vicar. Okay, so one more before I finish here, and this is still on. And Chris Hewitt, he's got a great question, which I'll copy. It's a long question, so I'll copy and paste that for next week. So this is Ollie. On a completely different note, I would love it if you would talk about your top tips for fairly new Christians, like which practices / readings or whatever you think are most helpful for those still finding their way. Fantastic question, Ollie. The first thing I would say is just to take an encouragement from the words of Christ. Knock and the door will be open to you. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you, as he says in the Sermon on the Mount. What you need to do is, as you already have done, is you need to make it the intention of your heart to seek Christ. Right? It's the intention of your heart that will lead you. Christ is the way. There are techniques, of course, there are things you could do, but Christ is the way. Commit yourself to Christ. That would be the first thing. Second thing I'd say is find a good church to go to. I'd love it if it was a Church of England church, an Anglo-Catholic Church of England church, a traditionalist church. Go on a church finder, see if you can find anything. I know I need to update it, by the way, and I will soon. On irreverendpod.com. We've got a church finder there where people have recommended church, but check out, see if you can find something. But surround yourself by wise people, find a wise priest or a wise spiritual person and ask for their advice. Start reading the Bible, find a Bible reading plan and start reading through it. Take it slowly, do it in small chunks, but acquaint yourself with scripture. Start to pray regularly. I always recommend the offices of morning and evening prayer from the Book of Common Prayer and using the lectionary, which is in the front, the 1928 lectionary, to follow the readings. It might seem archaic at first or arcane, but actually it's really, really easy to use, much, much easier than most of the modern equivalents, all of the modern equivalents, I would say. And I think it's very, very beautiful as well. There's many, many guides to how to pray from the Book of Common Prayer online. So just Google those. And that can give you a regular pattern of prayer, morning and evening. Shorten them if it's too much. Just do mornings if you can't do evenings as well. But go for it. Start a life of prayer. That would be the first thing. And then the other thing I'd say is well, a couple of things actually. Read spiritual books. That would be another thing. It's a practice that I always have a spiritual book on the go. Obviously, reading in general is just, absolutely essential to being a well-informed person. But read a spiritual book, have a spiritual book all the time on the go by somebody who inspires you to keep searching. Anthony Bloom is a wonderful writer on prayer, for example. Find his book, Beginning to Pray, but find it something deep. A lot of modern books on spirituality are very, very shallow. Find something deep and rich to read. There are so many things that I could recommend, but maybe something like that. I love C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity as a kind of introductory book as well. The other thing I would say is I would encourage you to engage in some kind of contemplative practice. Now, contemplative prayer and meditation varies massively. We talk about the tradition of Lectio Divina, which is holy reading of scripture. There's a great book by my friend Hans Boersma called Pierced by Love, which is slightly more academic and cognitive, but it's all about that practice. But there are all sorts of, you can find guides to Lectio Divina online. But it's about contemplative reading of scripture to help you commune with God. I'd also very much recommend practices of contemplative silence as well, which come out of the mystical tradition. A book that I've engaged with quite a lot recently is a book by Thomas Keating called Open Mind, Open Heart, which will introduce you to the practice of a contemplative silence. If you're interested, I'd really recommend reading some medieval mystical writings. I always find them really encouraging. Julian of Norwich would be one which would be very still well read and loved nowadays, but also The Cloud of Unknowing and books of this sort. You don't know how you find that, but I in any case, I'd really recommend you looking into developing some kind of contemplative aspect to your spirituality as well, because I think that's crucial. So I was slightly put off because I heard a buzzing on my door, and I don't know what that's about. Anyway, so that's it. Chris, I'm going to hold your comment over till next week because I think it's a really good comment and I'd like to address it. So that's it. I hope you found it interesting. I'm going to sign off now. I'm going to say thank you for listening, and thank you especially to those people who support. And please do support if you like the podcast, if you got this far, either by going to patreon.com/irreverend or irreverendpod.substack.com or our website irreverendpod.com, or finding my blogs, good things, at jamiefranklin.substack.com and or signs of the times blog.substack.com, and subscribing and supporting me there. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's say a prayer and then we will finish. And speaking of the Book of Common Prayer, why don't I read out the collect for this week? Let us pray. O God, the protector of all that trust in thee, without whom nothing is strong, nothing is holy. Increase and multiply upon us thy mercy, that thou, being our ruler and guide, we may so pass through things temporal, that we finally lose not the things eternal. Grant this, O Heavenly Father, for Jesus Christ's sake, our Lord. Amen. Should we say the grace together? The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Until next time, keep watch and keep the faith. Goodbye for now.